Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Nakamas, your instructor for World Literature 1, the first half of the paired classes. And just briefly like to say how excited I am to be with everybody as we begin our study of not only world literature, but we'll be in kind of a time machine during the semester. We'll travel way far back in time and then we'll start to move forward to the Renaissance and then we'll stop. So, with all that said, a good thing to do is just to talk about time and how we understand time today and how we need to think about time a little bit differently in order to do a deep dive into the class. So if everybody would, if you would think about this arrow in terms of human history. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw a couple vertical lines there to divide human history into three major eras, three major groups. And over here, this is where we are today. Today we're in the global age. You might have heard that. What brought us into the global age is this vertical line. And what this vertical line is a key invention, key part of technology, which is the internet. When the internet came about, it changed day-to-day life. Now, I was not born in the global age. I did not grow up in the global age. I grew up and about over here. This era is the modern age. The line that marks the modern from this, and this is the pre-modern, this is the Renaissance. So this is the time that we're going to end with. So this is a big chunk of human history, right? So everybody's familiar with when the internet came about. The Renaissance roughly was about, we could ballpark it, it ended about 1600. Began about in the, we could say maybe like 1490, almost 1500. So it was Renaissance was almost 100 years, right? So much of human history is in the pre-modern. And what we're going to do with the pre-modern is we're going to divide it again so we can have the Middle Ages, and then we have the ancient world or antiquity. So much of human history, this is something that people don't really stop to think about today, was spent in terms of, human beings, was spent living in the ancient world. And life in the ancient world is very different than the life that we live today, right? So there's all those major things that we stop to think about that are not there, like cars, telephones, right, computers, all those things. But back here in the ancient world, right, in order to have a book, you had to have paper. In order to have paper, you had to make the paper, right, and you had to have those technologies to do so. And the further we go back in time, the fewer technologies we have, right? Again, the further we move back in time, the fewer technologies we have. So we can go far enough back in time to where the technology for making paper, right, and for making ink don't exist. So then there's an interesting problem, which is how do we record and transmit knowledge, right? So how do we record transmit knowledge? And the answer to that is today what we call the oral tradition. So what the oral tradition consists of stories, poems, songs, and believe it or not, even plays that were transmitted by word of mouth. And over time, these stories, poems, songs, and plays would naturally change and evolve with each telling and retelling of that story or that poem or that song or that play. Reason being is that that story would be retold and recast in a way to keep the audience involved. So it was natural to have many variations of the same story. Little minor details would change, but the kernel, the core of that story would remain the same. And these stories, poems, songs, and plays existed in this format in word of mouth for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Right, you get the picture. Many, 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 many years. And it wasn't until the technology became advanced enough that then they were written down, right, and then put into books. And it wasn't until the very beginning of the Renaissance that the printing press came about that made the distribution and the recording of knowledge different, and that's why we moved from the pre-modern, just one of the reasons we moved from the pre-modern into the modern. Now, key term that you'll be hearing is going to be myth. Now, a lot of people today, when they hear the word myth, they associate it with the TV show Mythbusters. And what that show does is that it takes like urban legends or things that people say, and it determines whether or not they're valid. Now, that is not our definition, our understanding of the word myth. What myth is, myth refers to all of this, right? All of that content, all of that information that was generated during the oral tradition and then passed on night after night, year after year, generation after generation. So the different works that we're going to read from the ancient world are all examples of myths. They're all from the oral tradition. So in other words, perfect example would be Homer, right? Today we say Homer's the author of the Odyssey, which is false, right? The Odyssey, all those different stories had been floating around as part of the oral tradition of ancient Greece for years and years and years and years and years. Homer's the guy who took all those different stories and came up with a clear narrative and ordered it in the fashion that we have today. And we say that Homer wrote the Odyssey, which is false. And by the way, we don't even really know if there was a person today that we call Homer. We just have to make these educated guesses. So that's just how things go when we're over here and we have to reflect upon and learn about the ancient world, about antiquity. So this video is nearing the 10-minute mark, so we'll pick up in the next one and continue talking about the ancient world.